She raised him, protected him, and never asked for help. But now she's drowning in silence. When Keanu Reeves discovers his beloved sister is months behind on rent, he hatches a secret plan that could save her life. But if she finds out, it might destroy their bond forever. What happens next will leave you in tears. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The night had dragged on longer than expected. Cameras, lights, endless retakes. It was all part of the job. Keanu Reeves leaned back in the worn leather chair of his trailer, the clock flashing 2:13 a.m. on the wall. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him, but he stayed a few extra minutes, savoring the rare stillness after a chaotic day on set. He picked up his phone, almost absent-mindedly, not expecting much, maybe a few emails from his agent or a group text from the production team about tomorrow's schedule. But a single message caught his eye, standing out from the clutter. It was from Laura, an old friend of his sister Kim. They hadn't spoken in months. The message was short, but hit him like a punch to the gut. "She won't tell you, but she's 3 months behind on rent. I thought you should know." Keanu blinked, rereading the words. His stomach tightened. That couldn't be right. Just 2 weeks ago, he had talked to Kim over the phone. She had sounded upbeat, laughing about her new clients and her plans for a weekend yoga retreat she was organizing. There had been no hint of trouble, no sign that she was struggling. He sat up straighter, the fatigue falling away like a discarded coat. The trailer was suddenly too quiet, the air too heavy. He stared at the message for a long moment, torn between disbelief and an overwhelming dread. His mind raced, piecing together the signs he might have missed. She had brushed off his offer to visit. She had laughed a little too quickly when he asked if she needed anything. Kim had always been proud to a fault. She had raised him in many ways when they were young, standing between him and a chaotic world. Their mother worked hard, but it was Kim who packed his lunches, helped him with homework, whispered encouragement into his ear when he doubted himself. She was only 2 years older, but somehow she had always seemed like a force of nature, steady, protective, unwavering. He remembered the way she used to walk him to auditions when he was just a teenager in Toronto, those long, cold walks, her hand firmly on his shoulder, even when she was tired from working late shifts at a coffee shop to help pay the bills. She never asked for thanks. She never made him feel like a burden. And now she was suffering in silence, hiding her struggles even from him. Keanu set the phone down on the small table beside him and covered his face with his hands, the weight of it all pressed down hard on his chest. He wasn't the broke teenager anymore. He was Keanu Reeves. He could buy a house outright, erase debts with a single signature. Yet somehow, the one person who had given him everything refused to ask for help when she needed it most. He lowered his hands and stared out the small trailer window into the dark, starless night. A heavy whisper escaped his lips, barely audible in the stillness. "Not again," he said. "I won't let her fall." Keanu stood up, his body moving before his mind could fully catch up. He paced the narrow trailer, hands stuffed into the pockets of his worn jeans, his boots making soft, hollow sounds against the linoleum floor. His mind was a storm of memories and emotions, too many to separate, too heavy to ignore. He thought about all the times Kim had shielded him from the harder edges of their childhood, the way she had made small birthdays feel like magic with a single homemade cake, the way she had sewn his clothes when money was tight, humming softly to herself late into the night. She had been the architect of his resilience, the silent builder of his dreams. And now she was hiding her pain from him. He picked up the phone again, fingers hovering over her number. Part of him wanted to call immediately, to demand the truth, to promise her she didn't have to carry this burden alone. But he stopped himself. Kim's pride wasn't something he could bulldoze over. Charging in with offers of money would only make her retreat further. He needed to be careful, thoughtful, strategic. Slowly, Keanu opened a new message to Laura. "Thank you for telling me," he wrote. "I'll take care of it. Please, don't mention this to Kim." He pressed send and set the phone down again, heart pounding harder now, with the decision settling over him. He needed a plan. Something that would protect Kim's dignity while still lifting the weight off her shoulders. She deserved that. She deserved to be seen, not pitied. Keanu sat back down at the small table, grabbed a scrap of paper and a pen, and started scribbling ideas, crossing them out almost as quickly as they formed. Anonymous payments? Too risky. She would question it. A fake scholarship for community heroes? Maybe, but she might find it suspicious. A silent partner for her wellness business? Complicated, but possible. The night grew deeper around him. Outside, the quiet hum of the sleeping set faded into a vast, empty silence. Inside, Keanu wrestled with the problem the only way he knew how. With stubbornness. With heart. With the kind of quiet devotion Kim had once given him. He paused for a long moment, staring at the growing mess of notes in front of him. Then a thought came, simple and clear. He didn't need to save Kim. He needed to create a world where she could save herself. Keanu smiled, a small, tired curve of his lips. That was what Kim had always done for him, given him the tools, the quiet support, and the unwavering belief that he could build his own future. Now it was his turn. He folded up the paper carefully, slipping it into his jacket pocket. The plan could wait until morning. Right now, he just needed to hold on to the memory of his sister's strength and honor it in the way she deserved. He stood, turned off the trailer lights, and stepped into the night, a silent promise burning in his heart. The cool night air wrapped around Keanu as he stepped outside the trailer, the vast sky overhead glittering with silent stars. He pulled his jacket tighter around him, feeling smaller than he had in a long time. For a man who had traveled the world, played countless roles, and carried unimaginable fame, nothing cut through all of it like the simple, personal fear of failing the people he loved. His boots crunched softly on the gravel as he walked without a destination, letting the night carry him. He needed space to think, to breathe, to remember. A memory surfaced, uninvited but welcome. He was 19 again, standing outside a cramped Toronto apartment in the freezing cold, clutching a letter of rejection from yet another audition. His dream of acting felt like it was slipping away. His pockets were empty, his future unclear. But when he opened the door, there was Kim, sitting on the worn couch, a battered guitar in her lap and 2 steaming bowls of soup waiting on the table. She had smiled and said, "We make our own miracles, little brother. One bad day isn't the whole story." That night, she had handed him a $20 bill, the last she had, and made him promise not to give up. Now it was his turn to make sure her story didn't end in a bad chapter. Keanu found himself standing near the edge of the empty lot where the trailers were parked. In the distance, the faint buzz of a highway cut through the stillness. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of gratitude and guilt alike. Gratitude for having a sister like Kim. Guilt that he hadn't seen her struggle sooner. He took out his phone again, scrolling through his contacts until he found an old name. Sarah Whitmore, a friend who had once worked in small business grants for wellness practitioners. If anyone could help him craft something believable, something empowering rather than pitying, it would be Sarah. Without hesitating, Keanu typed out a quick message. "Sarah, it's Keanu. I need your advice. It's about helping someone quietly, someone proud. Are you free to talk tomorrow?" He hit send before he could second-guess himself. He knew this had to be done carefully, almost invisibly, like laying down stepping stones just far enough apart for Kim to believe she had crossed the river on her own. Pocketing the phone, Keanu finally turned back toward the trailers, exhaustion beginning to settle into his bones. Tomorrow would come fast, and with it, the need to act. But tonight, under the indifferent watch of the stars? He allowed himself a moment of quiet resolve. He would not let Kim slip through the cracks. Not after everything she had given him, not after everything she had sacrificed, without asking for thanks. "Not again," Keanu whispered to the night, his voice steady, his heart sure. "I won't let her fall." And somewhere deep inside, he knew, this time, he would be the one building miracles. The next morning, Keanu woke before the sun, his mind already racing. Sleep had been brief and restless, filled with flickering memories that felt more real than dreams. He sat on the edge of his bed in the trailer, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped tightly. He couldn't stop thinking about Kim. It wasn't just about rent. It wasn't just about money. It was about everything she had been to him, everything she had done without ever asking for anything in return. Growing up, their house had been full of love, but short on stability. Their mother, Patricia, had worked tirelessly, sometimes 2 or 3 jobs at a time, but there were long stretches when the weight of life seemed too much for her. During those moments, it had been Kim who stepped in, quietly, instinctively, becoming the anchor that Keanu needed. He remembered her packing his school lunch when their mom was working double shifts, always slipping in a handwritten note with a cartoon doodle and a few words of encouragement. He remembered her walking him home every day, making jokes to distract him when other kids sneered or teased him for his worn-out shoes or strange last name. One afternoon stood out more than the rest. He had been 10 years old, slight and awkward, already growing too tall for his own good. A group of older boys had cornered him behind the school, pushing him around, laughing at his strange accent and thrift store clothes. Before he could even think of how to escape, Kim had appeared fierce and fearless, throwing her backpack at the biggest boy and grabbing Keanu's hand to yank him away. She had a black eye for her trouble, but she never once complained. "You're worth fighting for, little brother," she had whispered that night, pressing a cold cloth to her bruised cheek. Keanu's chest tightened at the memory. She had been there in every quiet moment of fear, every lonely night, every setback that might have broken him if he'd been alone. Even when college acceptance letters had come for her, bright opportunities she had dreamed about, she had turned them down after he was injured in a minor car accident, staying home to help him through the recovery. At the time, he hadn't understood the weight of her sacrifice. He had been too young, too focused on healing. But now, looking back with the clarity of years, he realized that Kim had given up more than just an education. She had traded her own dreams to make sure his could survive. And now, here she was, silent, proud, struggling, and he hadn't even seen it until someone else told him. The thought was unbearable. But Keanu knew Kim as well as he knew himself. She would never take a handout, never accept money from him, not openly. Her pride was stitched into every part of her being, built from years of having to prove to the world, and maybe to herself, that she could stand on her own. He needed a different way. A way that honored her strength, her dignity, a way that would let her keep her pride and still give her the hand she would never ask for. Keanu stood and pulled a sweatshirt over his tired frame, pacing slowly across the narrow room. The morning sun was just beginning to push through the edges of the blinds, casting long stripes of light across the floor. Every fiber of him wanted to call Kim, to ask, to beg her to let him help. But he already knew how that would go. She would laugh it off, change the subject, swear she was fine, even if the walls around her were crumbling. He thought back to a conversation they'd had a few months earlier, over coffee in a small cafe tucked into a quiet street near Los Feliz. Kim had been talking about her freelance work, how rewarding it was to help others find balance in their lives. But there had been a shadow behind her smile, a tightness she couldn't hide. She had brushed it off when he asked, insisting everything was moving in the right direction. Now, he realized, she had been holding herself together with nothing more than hope and stubbornness. Keanu grabbed his phone again, scrolling through old messages between them. Jokes, updates, little snapshots of their everyday bond. No mention of trouble, no hint that she was drowning. He pressed the phone to his forehead, closing his eyes. He needed to do this right, not just throw money at the problem like some thoughtless celebrity gesture, not make her feel small or like a charity case. No, he needed to build something around her, a safety net she wouldn't even see. He sat back down and pulled a worn leather notebook from the drawer of the nightstand, the same one he had carried through years of acting gigs, motorcycle trips, and long days on set. Inside, the pages were filled with scribbles, ideas, reflections, dreams. He flipped to a blank page and wrote one line across the top. Help her without her knowing. Protect her pride, honor her strength. The plan started forming almost immediately, sparked by a lifetime of watching Kim navigate storms with nothing but grit and heart. He would find out exactly what she needed, quietly, carefully, and make sure she got it without ever tracing it back to him. He would be the invisible scaffolding around her life, the silent hand steadying the foundation without ever touching the walls she had built herself. Keanu smiled faintly, a small flicker of determination pushing back the ache in his chest. This was about more than rent. It was about repaying a debt he could never fully explain, even if he had 100 lifetimes to try. He stood up again, notebook in hand, and looked out the window into the waking world beyond. Somehow, some way, he would find a way to lift her up the way she had lifted him years ago, when he was just a frightened boy holding a broken lunchbox and a heart full of big, impossible dreams. He owed her that much. He owed her everything. As the city outside stretched into the first full light of morning, Keanu scribbled a rough blueprint into the notebook. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. First, he needed information. Quietly, discreetly, no sudden moves that could tip her off. He would have to reach out to a few trusted people who still lived near Kim, friends who wouldn't betray the confidence, people she trusted. Then, once he had the full picture, how far behind she was, what bills were stacking up, where the real pressure points were, he would create a way to help. But it couldn't look like a handout. It had to be something that restored her strength, not stripped it away. He thought about setting up a silent sponsor behind the scenes, someone anonymous who could offer a flexible grant, or better yet, open a few doors for her career. Maybe help her land a new contract, a steady gig coaching executives or consulting wellness programs for big companies. Something she could believe she earned on her own. It had to be real. It had to feel like a victory she had created, not a rescue delivered from the sky. Keanu paced again, this time with a restless energy that filled the small trailer like a rising tide. His heart still hammered with urgency, but now there was focus in it too. He thought back to the nights when he was 15, hiding bruises from cruel classmates, pretending not to notice the empty pantry at home. Kim had been the one who sat him down, stitched up his confidence with nothing more than a peanut butter sandwich and a promise that tomorrow would be better. "You're stronger than you know," she used to say, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "You just have to believe it." Those words had carried him through every rejection letter, every heartbreak, every moment of doubt. Now it was his turn to whisper them back to her, even if she never heard him say it out loud. "You're stronger than you know, Kim, and I believe in you." Keanu checked the clock. 6:17 a.m. The first call would have to wait a little longer. He couldn't risk waking anyone and sparking suspicion. He sat back down, opening a new page in the notebook, carefully outlining the next steps. Contact Kim's friend Claire first, then maybe her landlord, through a private investigator, just to see exactly how serious the rent situation had gotten. After that, figure out if there were job opportunities he could steer her toward without her realizing they were orchestrated. He wouldn't rest until she was safe. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but because she had fought for him when he had no one else. Because she had sacrificed dreams of her own so he could chase his. Because family wasn't just blood. It was promises made in the dark and kept in the light. Keanu leaned back, closing his eyes briefly. For the first time in hours, he felt the smallest whisper of hope rise inside him. This was going to work. He just had to move carefully, quietly, lovingly, just like she would have done for him. By mid-morning, Keanu had gathered himself enough to make the first calls. He needed a team, and he needed them to be people he trusted without reservation. No leaks, no slip-ups. Not just experts, but friends who understood the stakes. He started with Olivia Hartwell, his longtime lawyer. Olivia had handled his private matters for over a decade. She understood discretion better than anyone. Her sharp mind and calm demeanor had steered him through more storms than he cared to count. Then he called Daniel Knox. Daniel was a former film producer turned real estate developer. Over the years, Daniel had shifted his energy from Hollywood into buying, flipping, and sometimes quietly saving distressed properties. If there was a way to intervene in Kim's living situation without drawing attention, Daniel would know how to do it. Lastly, Keanu reached out to Maya Collins, a financial consultant who specialized in invisible philanthropy. She knew how to funnel help where it was needed without it ever being traced back to the source. Maya had once created an entire education fund for underprivileged children, and not one beneficiary ever knew who the real benefactor was. By noon, the four of them were gathered at a small rented meeting space in Burbank, one Keanu had used before for private matters. No big conference rooms, no staff, just a quiet place where plans could be made behind closed doors. Keanu arrived with a simple black folder under his arm. Inside were a few notes he had scribbled the night before. Kim's situation, the risks of direct intervention, the need for stealth, and one big non-negotiable. She could never know it was him. He placed the folder on the table and took a deep breath. "I need your help," he said quietly, "but it has to stay between us. No emails, no paper trails that can tie this back to me. Not now, not ever." Olivia leaned forward, her sharp eyes narrowing with interest. "Tell us everything." Keanu did. He told them about Kim, about her pride, about her stubborn refusal to accept help, even when it was desperately needed. He told them about the late-night message, about the years she spent lifting him when no one else did. He told them why failure was not an option. When he finished, there was a brief silence in the room. It wasn't the silence of uncertainty. It was the silence of people understanding the weight of what they were about to take on. Then Olivia spoke. "We're in," she said simply. Daniel nodded. "Count me in too. We'll find a way." Maya smiled warmly. "Let's make this happen." Keanu exhaled, tension loosening from his shoulders. This wasn't just a rescue plan. It was a vow. A silent promise to repay a lifetime of unseen sacrifices. The planning began immediately. Olivia pulled out a notepad and started sketching a flowchart, while Daniel paced slowly behind her, already calculating property values and ownership structures in his head. "We'll need a shell company," Daniel said, tapping his pen against the table. "Something clean, untraceable. It buys the building Kim lives in. Then we renegotiate her lease under better terms, maybe even offer to forgive the missed payments without her knowing." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "We can create a silent relief fund. Payments will look like they come from a tenant support initiative. She'll think it's part of a larger community program, not something targeted at her. And we should make it bigger than just her," Olivia added. "Spread it out. Help other tenants too. That way it doesn't look suspicious. She won't feel singled out." Keanu listened, absorbing every suggestion. He was good at disappearing into roles, but this was the most important performance of his life. If he slipped, if he gave away even a hint, Kim would never forgive him. "All right," Keanu said, his voice steady. "What about her work? She's still trying to build her wellness business. Can we help there too?" Maya's eyes lit up. "Absolutely. Anonymous sponsorships. We can arrange for small grants through a foundation focused on mental health and wellness entrepreneurs. Grants she'll think she qualified for on her own. Keanu smiled faintly. That would be perfect. A way to lift her, not just rescue her. A way to restore her confidence, not chip away at it. And the name? Daniel said, grinning. We need a project name, something just for us. Keanu didn't hesitate. The memory was already stirring inside him. Willow, he said softly. They all looked at him. There was a big willow tree behind our childhood apartment, Keanu explained, his voice rough with emotion. Keem and I used to climb it after school. Whenever the world felt too heavy, we'd hide in those branches and pretend we were somewhere else, somewhere safe. Project Willow it is, Olivia said, writing it down in bold letters at the top of the notepad. The room felt different after that. Heavier but steadier too, as if the old tree itself had wrapped them all in its quiet strength. Project Willow had begun. By the next morning, the team had broken the plan into detailed steps. Olivia would spearhead the formation of the shell company, carefully building a history for it so it appeared legitimate to any outsider. She would register it under a cluster of similar holdings, camouflaging it among dozens of small, community-based investment groups. Daniel would oversee the property acquisition, starting with Kim's building. He would arrange for inspections, contract reviews, and negotiations, all handled through proxy agents to keep Keanu's name completely out of sight. If everything went well, Kim would never know the ownership had changed hands. Maya, meanwhile, would organize the grants and professional support for Kim's wellness work. She reached out to several legitimate mental health and entrepreneurship foundations to partner anonymously, offering funding for select candidates. On paper, Kim would simply be one of the deserving recipients, recognized for her perseverance and mission. But Keanu's involvement would remain buried so deep it would never surface. That was the rule he insisted on from the start. No trace, no leaks, no slip-ups. As they finalized the structure, Daniel looked up. What if she refuses the lease offer? Or the grant, he asked, practical as always. Keanu leaned back in his chair, his eyes steady. Then, we find another way. Because failure wasn't an option. Kim had once given up her future so he could chase his. She had sacrificed college scholarships, job offers, and her own dreams without ever asking for thanks. It was a debt Keanu could never truly repay, but he could honor it, in the only way he knew how. Whatever happens, Keanu said, his voice low but unbreakable, we keep her dignity intact. She wins. She thinks she did it herself. That's the only way this works. The team nodded. They understood. This wasn't charity. It wasn't pity. It was about faith. Faith in Kim's ability to rise again, given just enough of a hand without her ever feeling the weight of it. Project Willow was no longer just a rescue mission. It was a promise, born under the memory of an old tree, carried forward by quiet love. By the end of the day, the first contracts were being drafted. Emails were sent. Quiet conversations began behind closed doors. And somewhere across the city, unaware of the storm gathering on her behalf, Kim Reeves finished her shift, gathered her worn jacket, and walked back to her tiny apartment, still believing she was fighting her battle alone. She had no idea yet, but soon, everything would change, and she would never even know who had made it happen. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional creak of old wood under Keanu's feet. He sat cross-legged on the floor of his home office, laptop balanced on his knees, eyes fixed on the glow of the screen. His fingers hovered above the keyboard. Then, with a deep breath, he began to type. Has someone ever helped you without asking for credit? How did it change your life? He didn't sign it. He didn't attach his name. He simply posted the question to a community blog he occasionally browsed, an old, heartfelt corner of the internet where people shared anonymous stories of resilience, loss, and quiet victories. It was one of the few places that still felt real, still felt human. He clicked submit and leaned back, unsure if anyone would respond. But within minutes, the replies started rolling in. A retired teacher wrote about a former student who had left envelopes of cash on her doorstep for 3 months straight, with a note that simply said, "For everything you gave me." Another post told of a neighbor who had secretly paid for a young couple's medical bills after their child fell ill. They never found out who it was, but they never forgot. And then there was the story of a janitor who had cleaned an office late every night without complaint. Years later, one of the employees he greeted in passing every day anonymously funded his daughter's college education. Keanu read each one slowly, absorbing the weight of every sentence. These were lives changed by unseen hands, by silent kindness, by people who didn't need applause to know they'd done something good. It moved him more than he expected. By the 20th post, his eyes stung. He wiped at them, surprised by the moisture. He hadn't cried in months, maybe years. But something about these stories, these quiet sacrifices, these invisible miracles, tapped into the deepest part of him. The part that remembered Kim covering the rent after their mother lost her job. The part that remembered a girl, barely 20, scraping by to make sure he had shoes for high school drama club. He remembered how she used to say, "We don't need to be seen to matter. We just need to show up." Keanu closed the laptop gently, not because he was done reading, but because his heart was already full. He sat in the silence, the words still echoing in his mind. What he was planning to do wasn't just a mission. It was a promise, a return of a lifetime's worth of love, without credit, without spotlight, just as she had once done for him. The next morning, Keanu woke before the sun, the words from the blog still lingering in his mind. He poured himself a black coffee, sat on the worn armchair near the window, and opened his laptop again. The post had exploded overnight. Hundreds of comments now filled the thread, each one a living testament to the power of silent kindness. Keanu scrolled through slowly, taking it all in. A woman shared how, when she was a struggling single mother, groceries mysteriously appeared on her porch every week for a year. She never knew who did it. She only knew that it kept her and her daughter from going hungry. A man recounted the day his car broke down on the highway and a stranger not only helped fix it but also handed him an envelope with enough cash to pay off the fines that had piled up against it. He tried to track the man down but never could. There was a post from a cancer survivor who wrote about a hospital bill that vanished overnight. No name, no explanation, only a note tucked into the discharge papers. Focus on living, not owing. Each story felt like a small beam of light breaking through the heavy darkness of the world. It wasn't about grand gestures or public recognition. It was about quiet moments where someone had chosen compassion over comfort, generosity over credit. Keanu rubbed his thumb slowly over the rim of his coffee mug. The world needed more of this. Not staged heroics, not headlines, just real people helping real people when it mattered most. And Kim, his sister who had once been his rock when everything else was crumbling, deserved to be lifted up by that same kind of invisible hand. She didn't need a brother swooping in like a celebrity, waving checks around and embarrassing her. She needed a miracle that felt like the world opening a door for her again, just when she was starting to believe all the doors were closing. He thought about how proud she'd looked the last time they talked, describing her new wellness coaching business, how she was helping others find their footing even when her own was slipping. How she had smiled, that stubborn glint in her eye when she said, "I'm building something real, little brother. No shortcuts." She was still fighting, even when the world wasn't watching. She always had been. Keanu leaned forward, fingers tapping out notes into a blank document. Names, ideas, steps. Project Willow wasn't just a plan anymore. It was a necessity. It was a debt of love he could never fully repay. He would make sure she never knew. And yet somehow he also hoped she would feel it. The way unseen kindness had saved others. The way it was about to save her. Without spotlight, without applause, only love, only loyalty. Later that day, Keanu sat in a quiet park tucked behind his apartment building, laptop resting on his knees. The warm breeze rustled the leaves overhead, casting shifting patterns of light across the screen. He watched more comments roll in. One in particular caught his eye. A man wrote about how, when he was just a teenager, he had been planning to drop out of school. His mother was sick, they had no money, and he couldn't see a future. But one morning, a teacher pulled him aside and told him there was a scholarship fund available, a fund that had been set up anonymously years before. No application, no competition. It was there for students like him, quietly, patiently waiting. That scholarship changed his entire life. He finished school, got a degree, and later returned to become a teacher himself. "I still don't know who set up that fund," the man wrote. "But I thank them every day. They didn't just save my education. They saved my future." Keanu sat back against the park bench, letting that sink in. Sometimes, the greatest impact came from the kindness no one ever saw being planted. And sometimes, it grew into forests no one ever knew to credit. He thought again about the old willow tree he and Kim had climbed in their childhood backyard. Its branches had been strong enough to carry them, even when the wind blew hard. Strong enough to shelter them through summer storms. No one ever saw its roots, but they were there, buried deep and silent, holding everything together. That was what he needed to be for Kim now. A root, a shelter, a silent strength. He closed the laptop slowly, the park fading into the warm colors of late afternoon. In the distance, he could hear children laughing, chasing one another between the trees. Hope, he thought. Hope wasn't loud. Hope wasn't proud. Hope was quiet, hands building invisible bridges. He walked home with a renewed determination, every step lighting the next part of the plan already forming in his mind. Project Willow had begun, and he would see it through, no matter what it cost him, no matter if she ever knew. Because sometimes, the greatest victories weren't shouted from rooftops. They were whispered quietly in the hearts of those who never gave up on the ones they loved. Even when love meant standing in the shadows. Even when love meant never being seen. The next phase of Project Willow began 2 days later. A woman named Claire knocked on Kim's apartment door just after noon. She wore jeans, a loose green blouse, and carried a small messenger bag filled with notepads, pens, and a discreet recording device hidden inside the lining. Her smile was warm, the kind that put people at ease without even trying. When Kim answered, her eyes were cautious but polite. "Hi," Claire said brightly. "My name's Claire Monroe. I'm working on a documentary project about independent wellness coaches. We're highlighting voices that don't always get the spotlight. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions?" Kim hesitated, glancing behind her into the modest apartment. She tugged her cardigan tighter around her. The apartment was neat, but there was no hiding the signs of strain. The peeling paint by the window, the stack of unopened mail tucked hurriedly behind a lamp, the sagging couch cushions. Still, Kim smiled faintly. "Sure," she said, stepping aside to let Claire in. "But it's not going to be very glamorous." Claire's heart ached, but she kept her face neutral. That's exactly the point. Real stories, real strength. They sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, a battered wooden surface that had clearly seen better days. Claire set a notepad between them and pulled out a small audio recorder, asking first if it was okay to record. Kim nodded. The first few questions were softballs. How did you get into wellness coaching? What inspires you? Kim answered with a quiet pride, her voice strong but her eyes tired. I guess I've always believed in helping people find balance, she said. I'm not famous. I don't have a big following. But if I can make a difference for even one person, that's enough. Claire steered the conversation gently toward Kim's day-to-day life. What was it like running her own business? What were the challenges? At first, Kim kept the answers light, joking about chasing overdue invoices and balancing passion with bills. But as Claire asked more thoughtful questions, the cracks began to show. Kim admitted business had been tough since the pandemic. Clients were fewer, payments slower. She had picked up side work, teaching yoga classes at a gym, freelance writing health articles. But it wasn't enough. Some months she barely scraped by. She had let go of her car last year to save on insurance. She sometimes went without heat to keep the electric bill down. But she said it all with a kind of quiet, almost stubborn dignity, as if she were determined not to sound like she was complaining. Claire's eyes roamed the apartment. She noticed the old heater clanking noisily in the corner, the threadbare rug with frayed edges, the pantry door left ajar revealing half-empty shelves. She saw the unopened envelopes too, some of them stamped with bright red letters. Final notice. Claire jotted silent notes as Kim talked. Not just about the finances, but about Kim's spirit, her resilience, her determination to survive, to help others, even as she struggled herself. It wasn't just financial support Kim needed. It was hope. The interview wound down after an hour. Claire thanked Kim for her time, packed up her things, and left with another bright, reassuring smile. Kim closed the door behind her with a long, slow exhale, leaning her forehead against the wood for a moment, before retreating into the apartment's dim silence. Later that night, in a private screening room set up temporarily in Keanu's guest house, Claire sat beside him as she played the footage. The room was dark, except for the soft glow of the screen. Keanu leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring intently at his sister's face. Every word she spoke landed heavy against his chest. Every forced smile, every deflection, every casual shrug that couldn't quite hide the truth, they all cut deeper than he expected. When the footage ended, Claire turned off the projector and looked over at him. Keanu didn't move at first. He stayed hunched forward, his hands clasped so tightly together his knuckles were white. Finally, he whispered, "She's still carrying the weight alone." Claire nodded, but she hasn't given up. Keanu wiped a hand across his face, not bothering to hide the tear that slipped down his cheek. His voice was rough when he spoke again. "Then neither will we." He stared at the blank screen a moment longer before standing. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice firming, "we start." The next morning, Keanu called his small team together in the same guest house, the footage still fresh in everyone's minds. Claire, Daniel, and Marcus sat around the table, their faces somber but determined. Keanu stood at the head of the table, holding a worn notebook in his hand, the same one he had started back when Project Willow was just an idea scribbled late at night. "Claire's visit gave us what we needed," he said. "Now we move to the real work." He flipped open the notebook. Inside were detailed plans, timelines, and contingencies for every move they would need to make to rescue Kim's life from the quiet collapse she refused to admit was happening. Marcus, the financial consultant, spoke first. "I've located the building owner," he said. "It's a small management company that handles multiple properties in that neighborhood. They're willing to negotiate, but they're hesitant about renewing Kim's lease because of the missed payments." Keanu nodded. "Buy the building anonymously," he said. "No direct offers, use a shell company. I don't care what it costs." Daniel, the former producer turned real estate expert, added, "We can structure the purchase through a trust. It'll take a little time, but it'll be airtight. They'll never trace it back to you." Keanu glanced at the notebook again, his thumb running absently along the edge of the pages. "And the overdue bills?" he asked. "I can take care of those quietly," Marcus said. "We'll create a fund that makes anonymous donations through a community organization, small enough payments to seem like grants or hardship assistance, nothing that raises red flags." Claire leaned forward, her eyes bright. "She's too proud to accept help directly, but if it looks like she's earned it, or like it's a community grant, she might believe it's just good fortune." "Good," Keanu said quietly. "That's exactly what we need." For a moment, the group sat in silence. the weight of what they were about to do settling over them. It wasn't just about paying off bills or fixing a building. It was about restoring dignity, protecting pride, offering help without leaving a scar. Claire broke the silence. "We should also think long-term," she said. "She's patching holes right now, but she needs a foundation, something stable." Keanu looked up, hope flickering in his tired eyes. "Like what?" "A studio space," Claire said. "A small wellness center she can call her own. Somewhere she can teach classes, host workshops, build a steady income. No more freelancing at gyms or chasing article payments." Marcus nodded in agreement. "If we set it up under a different benefactor's name, she'll never suspect you," Daniel added. "We could even seed a few clients, have people show up to book sessions early on so she feels the momentum." Keanu closed the notebook, pressing his palm against the cover like he was sealing a promise. "Make it happen," he said, "but do it gently. No fireworks, no headlines. She deserves to think she built it herself." His team dispersed with their assignments, each one carrying a piece of the quiet mission on their shoulders. Later that evening, after the flurry of planning, Keanu found himself alone again in the guest house. He opened Claire's footage one more time and watched it in silence. There was a part near the end of the interview that he had missed the first time, a moment when Claire asked Kim what kept her going even when things seemed impossible. Kim had smiled then, not the brittle, tired smile she used to cover pain, but a real, tender one. "My brother," she said simply. "He doesn't even know it, but just knowing he's out there, doing good, fighting his own battles, it reminds me to fight mine, too." Keanu paused the video there, staring at his sister's face frozen on the screen. "I'm here, Kim," he whispered into the quiet room. "And I'm not going anywhere." The screen stayed lit long after he shut his eyes, a silent promise burning through the night. The next morning, Keanu woke before dawn, unable to sleep after what he had seen and felt. The guest house was still and dark, but his mind raced with possibilities, fears, and hopes, all tangled together. He brewed a strong cup of coffee and sat by the window, staring out at the muted glow of the city waking up. Somewhere out there, Kim was already up too, probably stretching, preparing her morning tea, getting ready to face another uncertain day with the quiet resilience that had always defined her. Keanu thought back to when they were kids. Every time life threw something impossible their way, Kim was the one who smiled first. She was the one who said, "We'll figure it out," even when everything was broken. Now it was his turn to be the one who figured it out. He picked up his phone and sent a short message to Claire, Daniel, and Marcus. "Today we start." By midday, Marcus had already secured the first few payments to cover Kim's immediate bills. They were routed through a local nonprofit that specialized in hardship assistance for small business owners, an organization Keanu had quietly donated to months earlier without anyone knowing. Daniel was making progress too. The building owner had agreed to sell, and the paperwork was being fast-tracked through the trust they had created. It would still take a few weeks to close, but the eviction notices were already being held back, pending the sale. Meanwhile, Claire was scouting locations for a future studio space. She sent Keanu photos of 3 small storefronts not far from Kim's apartment, each one modest but full of potential, just like Kim herself. Keanu spent most of the afternoon glued to his phone, approving documents, reviewing plans, and coordinating with the team. Every step felt like stitching a torn piece of fabric back together, carefully and quietly, so the person wearing it never noticed the seams. By early evening, Keanu finally leaned back in his chair, exhausted but hopeful. They were doing it. Slowly, carefully, they were rebuilding her life beneath her feet, without ever touching her pride. He pulled out the notebook again, the one labeled Project Willow, and turned to a blank page. At the top, he wrote, "She will never know." Below it, he made a list of the promises he was silently making. She will never miss another rent payment. She will never have to choose between groceries and utilities. She will have a space where her dreams can grow. She will never feel alone, even when she thinks she is. When he finished writing, he sat there for a long time, feeling the weight of those promises settle into his bones. Later that night, as the city lights blurred into a sea of gold and silver outside the window, Keanu opened Claire's footage one last time. He watched Kim talk about resilience, about hope, about believing in small miracles, even when no one was watching. And quietly, without fanfare or audience, Keanu Reeves wept. Not because he was sad, but because he understood something in that moment he had never fully grasped before. The greatest acts of love are the ones done in silence, the ones where no credit is asked, no reward is expected, and no recognition is needed. Just a quiet vow whispered to the night. I'm here. I always have been. And with that, Keanu closed the laptop, turned off the light, and let the darkness wrap around him like an old familiar friend. Steady, enduring, and unbreakable. Just like Kim's love had been for him all those years ago. The morning sun rose over Los Angeles, casting a soft golden light across the city. In a quiet, nondescript office building, tucked between a florist and a vintage bookstore, Marcus finalized the paperwork that would shift ownership of Kim's apartment building. The trust, officially named Willow Property Management, now controlled the building. No ties to Keanu, no visible fingerprints, just a legal entity, part of a dozen others, blending into the city's complex web of real estate holdings. Marcus double-checked the transfer, the revised lease agreements, and the letters prepared for tenants. It all looked perfectly normal. Just another small transaction in a city full of them. But this one wasn't about profits. It was about protection. Across town, Kim had just finished her morning yoga session. She rolled up her mat, humming softly to herself, grateful for the little bit of calm it gave her each day. The unopened bills still sat on the kitchen counter, a constant reminder. But for the first time in weeks, she felt different, lighter somehow. She didn't know why. Later that afternoon, as Kim sorted through her mail, she found an official-looking envelope from the property management company. Her heart tightened. She braced herself for bad news. Instead, the letter inside surprised her. It explained that the building had recently been sold to a new management company. As part of their economic recovery incentive program, they were lowering rent by 15% for all current tenants. No catch, no new leases to sign, no hidden fees. Kim stared at the letter, rereading it twice, almost afraid to believe it. 15%. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to buy her breathing room, enough to keep her from falling further behind, enough to maybe start hoping again. She sat down heavily at the small kitchen table, the letter trembling slightly in her hands. After everything she had been through, the sleepless nights, the silent prayers, the moments she almost gave up, something had finally shifted. She pulled out her phone and texted her best friend, Carly. "You're not going to believe this." "Carly, what? Good news, I hope?" "Kim, my new landlord just lowered my rent. 15% less starting next month. No reason, just said it was an incentive thing." "Carly, OMG? That's amazing. Maybe life's finally turning around for you." Kim smiled at the screen. Maybe it was. She didn't question it too hard. After all, how many bad breaks had she endured without asking why? Maybe, just maybe, she could accept a good one without suspicion. Meanwhile, across the city, Keanu sat in his trailer between takes, staring quietly at his own phone. Marcus had just sent the final confirmation. "Marcus, it's done. She's safe now. First step, complete." Keanu closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair, letting the moment wash over him. No one would ever know. Not Kim, not the tenants, not even his closest friends. And that was exactly how he wanted it. This wasn't about recognition. It wasn't about gratitude. It was about balance. about paying back the invisible debts that love and loyalty had built over a lifetime. A knock at the door broke his thoughts, a production assistant reminding him they were ready on set. Keanu tucked his phone into his jacket pocket, stood, and gave a quiet nod. As he walked onto the soundstage, the world saw only the actor, the star stepping back into the spotlight. But deep inside, beneath the lights and cameras and scripted lines, a brother's silent promise was already unfolding. And it had only just begun. Kim spent the next few days in a quiet daze of cautious relief. She cooked herself better meals, she slept a little more deeply. For the first time in months, she could breathe without the heavy pressure of unpaid bills sitting like a stone on her chest. She still lived simply. She still cut coupons and stretched every dollar. But something inside her shifted. It wasn't just about survival anymore. Maybe, just maybe, it could be about living again. One afternoon, while sorting laundry, Carly called. "Hey, superstar?" Carly said with a grin in her voice. "How's the rich life treating you?" Kim laughed. "Rich? Hardly. But I'm not drowning anymore, so that's something." "You deserve it," Carly said warmly. "After everything, it's about time something good found you." Kim hesitated, then said quietly, "Sometimes I wonder why now. Why after so long?" "Maybe because you kept fighting," Carly said. "Maybe because you didn't quit." Kim looked around her small, sunlit apartment. The peeling paint on the walls hadn't magically repaired itself. The old couch still sagged in the middle, but it felt different now. It felt like a place with possibilities. "I'm not going to waste it," Kim said firmly. "You better not," Carly teased. "Next thing you know, you'll be one of those motivational speakers, standing on stage, telling everyone how you beat the odds." Kim laughed again, feeling something rare and precious bubbling up from inside. Across town, Keanu watched the world move around him through the tinted window of a black SUV. He had just finished a long day on set, the usual interviews and photo ops, but his mind wasn't on the movie. It was still with Kim. He pulled out his phone and reread the latest update from Marcus. "Marcus, tenant notices signed. Rent changes confirmed. No suspicion. All is smooth." Keanu smiled faintly. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, wanting to text Kim, to say something simple like, "Thinking of you" or "Proud of you." But he didn't. This wasn't about reminding her of him. This was about her standing tall, feeling strong, believing in herself. He leaned his head back against the seat, exhaustion pulling at him, but a deep satisfaction threading through the tiredness. The world thought of him as the hero on the big screen, the man with the leather jacket, the motorcycle, the quiet intensity. They didn't see these small moments. They didn't know how much they meant. Helping Kim, quietly, invisibly, it felt more important than any role he had ever played. It felt like setting something right. That night, in her apartment, Kim sat on the floor with a worn notebook open across her knees. She hadn't written in it for months. It was where she used to jot dreams, plans, goals, before life had made her too tired to believe in dreams. She picked up her pen and hesitated. Then, carefully, she wrote, "A goal? Save enough to take a real vacation. Goal. Rebuild my private wellness coaching practice. Goal. Volunteer at a local shelter." 3 simple goals. Nothing grand, nothing impossible. But as she stared at the ink drying on the page, a lump rose in her throat. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't finished yet. She wiped her eyes quickly and smiled to herself. Outside her window, the city buzzed and shimmered. Ordinary, messy, alive. And somewhere across town, her brother sat in the shadows, smiling too. He didn't need thanks. He didn't even need her to know. Just seeing the light return to her eyes, that was enough. The next morning, Cam stood by her tiny kitchen window, a cup of coffee warming her hands. She watched a group of kids race by on scooters, their laughter trailing in the cool air. The sound stirred something deeper than nostalgia, It stirred ambition. A quiet voice inside her whispered, "It's time." She made a list on a scrap of paper. Things she needed to do, clients she wanted to reach back out to, new workshops she could create. She didn't know how everything would unfold, but for the first time in a long time, she believed something could unfold. Later that afternoon, she called Carly again. "Guess what?" Kim said, barely containing her excitement. "You won the lottery?" "Even better," Kim said with a laugh. "I'm planning to launch a new wellness series, mind-body workshops, sliding scale so everyone can afford them." Carly whistled. "Look at you, boss lady." Kim grinned. "If the universe is finally giving me a second chance, I'm not going to waste it." On the other side of town, Marcus updated Keanu once more. "Marcus, she's picking up momentum, talking about starting workshops again. Energy's changing." Keanu read the message in the middle of a quiet cafe, hidden behind a ball cap and sunglasses. He closed his eyes for a second, feeling a wave of emotion pass through him. It wasn't just the rent. It wasn't just the bills. It was about dignity, about pride, about giving Kim the freedom to fight for her dreams again. He thought back to all those nights years ago when Kim had stayed up late helping him study, when she had worked double shifts to pay for his music lessons, when she had defended him against the world because she believed he could be something more. She never asked for anything in return. And now, just like then, she still wouldn't. But that was fine. He didn't need her to ask. As he paid for his coffee and walked back into the golden afternoon light, Keanu felt something unshakable inside him. This was just the first step. Project Willow was only beginning. The real healing, the real transformation, was still to come. And he would be there, hidden in the background, every step of the way. Because family wasn't about credit. It was about love that asks for nothing and gives everything, always. That night, after returning home from a long day on set, Keanu sat quietly at the small wooden desk tucked against the window of his rented apartment. The city outside buzzed with life, but his world was hushed, still. He opened his laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard for a moment before he typed the question. If someone gave you a second chance, what would you do with it? He didn't sign the post with his real name. Instead, he used a simple pseudonym, one he'd used a few times before when he needed a place to think out loud without the weight of fame pressing down on every word. The post went live on a small online forum centered around life reflections and personal growth, a place where people came not to perform but to tell the truth. Within minutes, the first replies began to trickle in. Keanu sat back, arms folded, watching the words appear. A young mother wrote about how a stranger had once paid her overdue electric bill. She had gone back to school because of that one act, determined to honor the gift by creating a better future for her daughter. A man from Detroit shared how a recovering addict had given him a job washing cars when no one else would. Now he ran his own detailing business and mentored others fighting their way back. A retired soldier described a moment in a dark parking lot where a fellow vet stopped him from making a mistake he could never undo. That second chance led him to volunteer at a crisis center today, saving others the way someone had saved him. Keanu read each story slowly, feeling the weight of every syllable settle in his chest. These weren't fairy tales. These were battlefields fought in living rooms, classrooms, back alleys, and empty bank accounts. These were second chances paid for in courage and quiet sacrifice. And somewhere in those voices, he heard Kim's spirit too, the same determination that had kept her standing long after easier roads had crumbled. He wiped at his eyes, not bothering to hide the tears that came. This wasn't about charity. This wasn't about being a hero. It was about recognizing that even the smallest hands, reaching into the dark, could pull someone back toward the light. And Keanu realized something else too. Helping Kim wasn't the finish line. It was just the beginning. If he could create one second chance for her, maybe he could create others. ripples spreading outward in ways he couldn't predict but knew were needed. He leaned back in his chair, thinking. It was time for Project Willow to grow. Time to think even bigger. But first, there was more to read, more to understand. The human heart, after all, didn't heal through plans and strategies alone. It healed through listening. Keanu refreshed the page. More stories poured in, and he kept reading, deep into the night. By the time the clock crept past midnight, Keanu had read over 100 stories. Some were just a few sentences long, others stretched into paragraphs that unfolded like confessionals, raw and unpolished. But every single one struck a chord. One story came from a man who'd spent 15 years behind bars. He didn't explain why, just that when he got out, no one would hire him. Not until an elderly woman named Denise offered him a job fixing fences on her property. She didn't ask what he'd done, she only said, "Everyone deserves a sunrise." That job led to others. And now, he wrote, "I've got a small business and 3 people I've hired who were just like me. I'm not trying to be perfect, just better. Every day." Another post came from a high school senior in Alabama. She said her math teacher had stayed late 3 nights a week to help her pass geometry. "I was on the verge of dropping out," she wrote, "but he told me I was more than my grades. Now, I've been accepted into nursing school. I want to be the person who shows up like he did." Keanu leaned forward, chin in his hand. The stories weren't grand, they weren't viral, but they carried something even more valuable: truth. These second chances weren't about glory. They were quiet, often unnoticed, sometimes even unwanted at first, but they changed lives. He clicked on one more. It was from a woman named Lauren, who had fled an abusive marriage with her 2 kids and nothing but a duffel bag. She wrote about a bus driver who'd let her ride free across 2 state lines. "I never saw him again," she wrote, "but if I ever do, I'll tell him that his act of kindness gave me back my freedom." Keanu's throat tightened. Freedom. That was what this was all about. He wasn't just helping Kim stay afloat. He was helping preserve her dignity, her identity, her freedom. She had sacrificed so much for him, and now he was walking the same quiet path she once walked for him, offering help without asking for recognition, without demanding a thank you, without leaving a trace. He got up, walked to the window and opened it slightly. The cool night air swept into the room, brushing against his face. In the silence, he whispered, "If you're still out there, Willow, I hope you're proud." Willow wasn't a person. It was the tree they used to climb as kids. The symbol of their bond, of Kim's strength, of everything she had ever done for him when the world seemed like too much. And now her brother would stand like that same tree, strong, steady, invisible from a distance, but unshakable at the root. The comment section refreshed again. News stories rolled in like waves across the screen. And Keanu, tired but more certain than ever, sat back down. He had a plan to finish. By morning, the post had thousands of replies. Keanu scrolled slowly now, taking his time, no longer rushing to absorb as much as he could. It wasn't about the number of stories, it was about their weight, their honesty. Each one felt like a small lantern in a dark room. One message stopped him cold. It was from someone who signed only as J. The message was short. "When I was 16, I almost didn't make it. No money, no place to sleep. I sat outside a gas station for 2 nights, pretending to wait for someone who wasn't coming. A man handed me a sandwich and said, 'You don't owe me anything, but promise me you'll do something kind for the next person who needs it.' I never forgot him. I run a shelter now." Keanu blinked slowly. No photo, no last name. Just that promise, kept like a secret seed that had grown into shelter for others. A second chance, passed hand to hand, quietly and without fanfare. He clicked away and closed the laptop, but the words remained with him. The promise. He thought again of Kim. Her quiet sacrifices, the nights she worked doubles, the times she skipped her own meals so he could eat after school, the college invitations she threw out after their mother had another breakdown. She'd done all of that, and not once had she asked for credit. Not once had she made him feel like a burden. She had simply said, "I believe in you." And now it was his turn to do the same. Without needing to be seen, without needing to be thanked, just to believe in her, the way she had always believed in him. He stood up from the chair and stretched, his joints stiff from sitting too long. Outside, the sun had started to rise, brushing the horizon with gold. It was a quiet dawn, unnoticed by most of the world, but for Keanu, it felt like the beginning of something sacred. He grabbed a pen and notepad, sat back down at the desk, and began outlining the next phase of Project Willow. No more waiting. Kim's second chance had already begun, and no one, not even she, would know just how far her little brother would go to protect it. The storefront sat quietly on the corner of a side street, just 3 blocks from Kim's apartment. A modest but elegant building with large windows, natural wood accents, and a soft gold sign that read, "Emerge Wellness Studio." It hadn't existed a month ago. In fact, it hadn't existed at all until Keanu made a few midnight calls, redirecting funds from a dormant charity initiative he'd helped fund years earlier. The studio was built from the ground up in under 4 weeks, staffed by real professionals, designed with healing in mind, and crafted specifically for one person: Kim. Keanu didn't want to give her a job. He wanted to give her a doorway, a future she could claim as her own, without ever knowing someone had quietly unlocked it for her. That was the only way she'd take it. She had always been fiercely independent, carrying burdens others never even noticed. This had to feel like a real break, a miracle that made sense in her world. So he worked with his consultant, Olivia, and studio developer Mark to structure it just right. The founder would be a wellness entrepreneur from Portland who'd recently relocated. The team would be Real, a yoga instructor with trauma training, a certified meditation coach, and a studio manager who'd worked in nonprofits. All vetted, all unaware of Keanu's connection. The final piece was the role, Community Wellness Director. A leadership position that offered flexibility, creative freedom, and, above all, dignity. The kind of role Kim had dreamed about, but never dared apply for. They had to reach out to her. That was the plan. She couldn't be seen pursuing help. It had to come to her. Mark made the call. He'd reviewed her portfolio, found her through a local wellness coalition. He mentioned he'd been blown away by her quiet resilience, her thoughtful video essays, her consistent community outreach, even in hard times. "I was stunned she wasn't already running something," he later told Olivia. She didn't just have experience, she had depth. When the email came through, Kim stared at it in disbelief. Her name, spelled right. The tone, warm, respectful. The offer, genuine. For the first time in months, maybe years, something opened in her chest. A tiny exhale of hope. She responded 2 days later, careful not to sound too eager. After a video interview and one in-person visit to the newly opened studio, she was offered the role. "I didn't even apply," she told her best friend later that week, eyes wide. "They found me. Isn't that wild?" Kim's first day at Emerge Wellness Studio felt almost surreal. The floors gleamed. The soft scent of sandalwood floated in the air. Light poured through the windows in golden rays that made everything feel open and safe. She walked slowly through the main space, fingertips brushing the edge of the front desk, past the racks of rolled yoga mats and calming affirmation cards, into the bright studio space where morning classes would begin. It felt like she belonged here. The other team members welcomed her with the kind of sincere warmth that didn't feel forced. There was no awkwardness, no hidden suspicion. They treated her like someone whose presence made sense, like her being there was inevitable. That alone brought tears to her eyes when no one was looking. She wasn't used to this kind of grace. Too many years scraping by, making do, coaching others while quietly struggling herself. Too many months saying no to things because the rent came first. But here, no one asked what she'd been through. They only asked what she wanted to create. At lunch, she found herself in the break room with Chloe, the studio's mindfulness coordinator. They shared green tea and soft laughter about their shared love for overwatering plants. Kim mentioned an idea she had about building a community grief circle, one that didn't rely on therapy jargon, but gave people space to talk, breathe, and be. "That sounds exactly like something this place needs," Chloe said. "You should totally do it." By the end of the week, Kim had already outlined 3 new programming ideas. She stayed late, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Each night, she walked home lighter. Her posture began to shift. Her smile returned. Not the polite, public kind, the real one. At home, she made small upgrades, replaced a torn curtain, scrubbed the kitchen tiles, pulled the paint swatches she'd once buried in a drawer, taped them back to the wall, and dreamed again about soft, olive green or calming dusk blue. She wasn't rich now. The salary was modest. But it came on time, and it came with dignity. Meanwhile, across the city, Keanu sat quietly on his balcony, watching the last light of day slip behind the hills. He just finished reading an email from Olivia with a studio update. "She's blossoming," it said. "Exactly as you hoped." He didn't respond immediately. He sat in the silence, letting the quiet fill him with something deeper than relief, a kind of reverence. He could still hear her voice from that old home video, decades ago. "Don't give up," her younger self whispered from memory. "You're meant to build things that last." "Tonight," he whispered back, "so are you." 2 weeks into her new role, Kim stood in front of a small group at Emerge Wellness Studio. The chairs were arranged in a wide circle. The lights were dim, not dark. Candles flickered near the walls. A sign on the door read, "Community Circle, all are welcome." She took a breath. No script, no expectation. Just people. 8 faces watched her with varying degrees of curiosity, weariness, and guarded hope. There was a woman in her 60s who had recently lost her partner, a young man fresh out of rehab, a mom who hadn't been able to cry since her child moved out. Kim welcomed them all, not with perfect words, but with something stronger. Presence. "I don't have answers," she began, voice soft but steady. "But I do have space. And sometimes, space is what we need most." They talked for 90 minutes. They laughed, cried, paused for long silences. No one looked at a phone. No one tried to fix anyone. They just listened, and something opened. Later that evening, after everyone left, Kim sat alone on the studio floor, legs crossed, palms resting gently on her knees. Her heart felt full but also still. She looked up toward the ceiling, blinking against unexpected tears. "And forgot I could still do this," she whispered. Back at his quiet home, Keanu watched the video his team had discreetly recorded through the studio's observation window. The camera was mounted high in the corner, silent, respectful, unobtrusive. He watched her body language, the calm command of her tone, the way she mirrored pain without absorbing it, offering steadiness, like an anchor in deep water. He paused the footage mid-scream. Her smile, so familiar, lit up the screen. "He's back," he murmured to himself. It wasn't about money. It never had been. For Kim, it was always about meaning. She could survive on little. She always had. But what had nearly crushed her was the slow erosion of purpose. A slow isolation where it felt like the world had moved on without her. Where she kept giving and the world forgot to give back. Now, she was building again. Not just for herself, but for others. Keanu closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair. The work wasn't done. Not yet. But something had shifted. The first breath after being underwater too long. The flicker of warmth in a winter that had lasted too long. Across town, Kim walked home under a violet sky. She passed a mural painted on the side of a brick building. A willow tree, branches stretched wide, roots deep in a swirl of colors. She paused. It hadn't been there last month. Someone had painted it quietly, without fanfare, without a name. She smiled to herself, not knowing why it made her chest ache in the best way. And then she kept walking, unaware that someone, somewhere, was walking beside her in every way that mattered. Kim sat at the front of the wellness studio, her voice calm but vibrant as she guided a group of 10 young women through a meditation session. The studio's soft lighting glowed against the polished floors, and the scent of lavender diffused from a corner table. When she opened her eyes, a room full of women, some barely out of high school, others mothers with tired shoulders, were watching her with quiet trust. 3 months earlier, Kim was behind on rent, barely scraping by. Now she wore a loosely woven sweater with the logo of the studio stitched across her chest and a sense of belonging stitched even deeper beneath her skin. The leadership role had changed everything. She'd been hesitant at first, confused even, when the job offer came from a studio she hadn't applied to. But the hiring manager had insisted they were impressed by her content, her values, her vision, so she said yes. And everything after that felt like life had finally tilted back in her favor. She now organized weekly events, self-care workshops, trauma-informed yoga sessions, and free body-positive support circles. Young women from all backgrounds showed up, not for fitness, but for healing. And Kim had become their anchor. One Saturday morning, Kim arrived early to prepare for an outdoor community event, a Wellness in the Park series she had created from scratch. It offered free group stretching, mindfulness talks, and healthy snacks donated by a few local bakeries. She had no idea the city blog had picked up on it. She didn't know that 3 different journalists were already tracking her rising profile. She was too busy hauling foldable mats from the back of her car, setting up canopies, checking water stations, and greeting every single person with that kind, deliberate tone people had started to call classic. What moved her most wasn't the turnout, it was the stories. A single mom told her she hadn't laughed in weeks until she came to Kim's event. A teenage girl confided that her panic attacks had lessened since listening to Kim's podcast. An older man, silent at first, placed a tiny folded note in her palm before walking away. It simply read, "Thank you for making me feel seen." By noon, the park buzzed with gentle music, conversation, and calm energy. Kim stood in the center of it, smiling, both overwhelmed and grounded. "I think," she told one volunteer, "this is what I was always meant to do." Across the lawn, leaning against a tree in a hoodie and sunglasses, Keanu watched in silence. His presence was unnoticed, just another quiet face among the crowd. He stood at a distance, arms crossed loosely, eyes soft with quiet pride. He saw Kim gently guide an elderly woman into a seated meditation. He watched her crouch to speak eye level with a nervous teenage girl. He listened as the community clapped for a guest speaker Kim had invited. Someone who had once been homeless and now ran a small yoga program for veterans. Then, as she moved between circles of people, Kim walked right past him. For a fleeting second, Keanu held his breath. But she didn't notice him. She was glowing, focused, fulfilled, and finally free from the weight she had carried alone for so long. He let her pass, then closed his eyes for a moment. A wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed. Keanu smiled and whispered to himself, This was worth everything." He turned and walked away before she could ever see him. He didn't need to be thanked. He just needed her to keep rising. The city was quiet that night, the kind of stillness that invited reflection. Inside her modest apartment, Kim sat on her bed, a cup of herbal tea resting untouched on the nightstand. The clock read 12:47 a.m., but she couldn't sleep. Too much energy hummed beneath her skin, an odd mix of gratitude, disbelief, and unresolved curiosity. The day had gone better than most. Her Wellness Studios event had drawn in over 30 people from the neighborhood. Teen girls, working mothers, older women, all laughing, listening, breathing together through mindfulness exercises and guided meditations. One woman approached her afterward, teary-eyed, and said, "You made me feel like I mattered for the first time in months." That stayed with her. It wasn't the first time someone had said something like that lately. Each week, she felt her confidence building in quiet, almost surreal increments. The way people looked at her now, like she was someone worth listening to. Someone who had survived something and come out wiser, stronger. But still, the question nagged at her. How did this all happen? She hadn't applied for the job. The offer came out of nowhere. Her rent had been lowered out of the blue. Even her podcast, barely 5 episodes in, was starting to attract listeners she didn't know. It all felt like the universe had decided to pivot in her favor. And yet, a part of her still struggled to believe she deserved it. She picked up her journal, a worn leather-bound book she'd used since before the pandemic. Pages were filled with thoughts, questions, private doubts no one else would ever see. She clicked the pen and let the silence stretch before starting. "I still don't know how things turned around," she wrote, "but I'm grateful, deeply, fully grateful. It's like the walls I was leaning against all started pushing back at the same time, lifting me. And maybe that's grace. Maybe it's the universe finally answering the years I spent whispering into the dark." She paused, then underlined the next sentence. "I just wish I could thank whoever believed in me first." Her hand trembled as she wrote it. "Whoever it was, you saved more than just my finances. You reminded me that I still mattered, that I wasn't invisible." She stared at the page for a long time, then quietly folded it in thirds as if sealing it with emotion alone. No envelope, no recipient. She placed it beneath her pillow, not knowing why. It wasn't meant to be sent. It was meant to rest close to her, just in case life ever gave her a moment to repay it. The next morning, Kim awoke with the letter still beneath her pillow. She didn't touch it, didn't reread it. It had already served its purpose. Some thoughts aren't meant to be shared. They're meant to be honored in silence. She got up, pulled on a soft sweater, and wandered into the kitchen. Sunlight streamed through the window, catching dust motes dancing lazily in the air. On the table was something unexpected, a bouquet of pale purple lilies, her favorite. No card, just a small tag from a local florist that read, "You are seen, keep going." Kim blinked at it, stunned. Her fingers grazed the petals. Who would have known? She picked up her phone to text a few friends, asking if someone had dropped by as a surprise. One after another, they replied with sweet confusion. No one claimed credit. Her eyes welled up with something she couldn't name. Not sadness, not joy, just the feeling of being remembered by someone who didn't need applause. Halfway across town, Keanu sat in the back corner of a quiet coffee shop. His assistant, Mary, slid into the seat across from him and opened her bag. She pulled out a worn, folded note and handed it over gently. Left this under her pillow," Mari whispered. "I had someone bring flowers. I didn't mean to snoop, but this was there. I thought maybe..." Keanu stared at it, recognizing the careful folds, the soft weight of someone unburdening themselves in secret. He hesitated before opening it. Then slowly, as if peeling back time, he unfolded the page and began to read. His eyes scanned the words, each line a quiet tremor. When he reached the sentence, "I just wish I could thank whoever believed in me first," something broke open inside him. He looked down, jaw tightening to steady the emotion threatening to rise too quickly. Mari said nothing. She knew the rule. He never wanted to be the hero in anyone's story. Not publicly, not to family. He folded the letter again with reverence and placed it gently in the inner pocket of his jacket. Then he looked out the window at the street beyond, where people hurried past without knowing how close. Kindness often stood beside them. "She deserves all of it," Keanu finally murmured. "She's starting to believe that," Mari said softly. "That's enough for me," he replied. They sat in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. Outside, the city moved on like usual, cars rushing, pigeons scattering, sunlight pressing through gray clouds. But inside that moment, something lasting had formed, a bond between a brother and sister, one spoken not with grand declarations or headlines, but with folded pages, anonymous bouquets, and invisible hands catching someone just before the fall. Later that week, Kim hosted a community meditation event on the rooftop of the wellness studio. The sunset cast amber light over the skyline, and folding chairs lined the edges of the rooftop garden. Wind chimes moved gently in the breeze. She wore a soft gray sweater and held a candle as she spoke to the small crowd gathered before her. "I used to think that strength meant doing everything alone," she told them, "that asking for help was weakness, or that opportunities only came to people who already had it all together. But lately, I've come to believe something else." The group leaned in, silently attentive. "I think sometimes we're carried by grace, by people we never see, by love we don't recognize until much later." In the back row, a woman with silver hair wiped her eyes. Kim smiled at her, then turned back to the crowd. "You don't have to know who believes in you. Just know that someone does." Afterward, people stayed to talk, to hug, to ask for advice. A few left notes in the bowl near the candles, notes of gratitude or quiet confession. Kim read each one as she packed up, folding them into her pocket like small blessings. Back in her apartment, she took off her shoes and curled up on the couch, exhausted but full. She didn't know that earlier that day, another quiet figure had stood just outside the rooftop stairwell. Keanu, in a baseball cap and scarf, watching from a distance. He hadn't stayed long, just long enough to hear her words. In his hotel room that night, Keanu took the journal page from his pocket again. He read it once more, tracing the curve of her handwriting with his eyes. Then he took out his own notebook. No title, no fanfare, just a blank page. He began to write. "She believed in me before anyone else did. She taught me how to listen, how to sit with silence, how to be gentle with people, even when the world isn't. I don't think I ever said thank you properly. Maybe I still won't. But this is my way." He closed the notebook and set it on the table, beside his keys and a half-finished tea. The city lights outside pulsed gently against the night sky. Sometimes, love wasn't loud. It didn't come with headlines or applause. It came in a stranger's flowers, in a letter never sent, in a rooftop gathering under a setting sun. Kim never found out where the flowers came from, never knew who had read her letter or who made the rent drop just when she needed it. But she kept going, and with each step, she made a life that shined brighter than the one before. That was enough. And for Keanu, that had always been the point. The scent of eucalyptus and lavender drifted through the air of the wellness studio's main hall as sunlight streamed in from tall windows. What had once been a modest community space had grown in just a few months into a vibrant center of healing and hope. And at the center of it all was Kim. It started with one scholarship. A woman named Denise, recently released from a women's correctional facility, had walked into the studio unsure of what to expect. She was used to being ignored, judged, and dismissed. Kim welcomed her with open arms. No questions, no hesitation, just a yoga mat, a hot cup of herbal tea, and an invitation to sit and breathe. From that single act, the idea blossomed. Kim proposed expanding the studio's mission, to offer scholarships and wellness programs specifically tailored for women rebuilding their lives, those coming from prisons, domestic violence shelters, and addiction recovery programs. With board approval and quiet funding support that Kim still didn't know came from Keanu, the initiative launched within weeks. Word spread quickly. Caseworkers began referring clients. Judges began mentioning the program during sentencing. Therapists told their patients. And women came, cautiously at first, then in waves. The studio added trauma-informed yoga sessions, mindfulness workshops, and evening circles where women could simply speak and be heard. They installed lockers for women who had nowhere else to store their belongings. A fridge in the corner always had something healthy to eat. It wasn't just about wellness anymore, it was about dignity. One afternoon, while organizing materials for the new Gentle Start session for first-time attendees, Kim noticed a young woman lingering outside the studio's front door. She had a toddler on her hip and wore a hoodie 2 sizes too big. Her eyes were alert but guarded. Kim stepped outside. "Hi there," she said gently. "I'm Kim. Would you like to come in?" The woman hesitated, shifting the child to her other side. I don't know. I'm supposed to meet someone from the shelter down the block. She said to try here." "You came to the right place," Kim said, smiling. "What's your name?" "Tasha," she replied after a beat. "This is Ava." "Hi, Tasha." "Hi, Ava." Kim bent down to smile at the girl, who peeked out from behind her mother's arm. "We've got space for both of you. Want to come inside?" Tasha nodded slowly, stepping through the doorway and into a new chapter of her life. At first, Tasha didn't say much. She sat at the back of the room during the meditation sessions, eyes darting toward Ava every few seconds, making sure her daughter was safe in the studio's small children's corner. But over time, something in her began to soften. Kim watched carefully, never pushing. She knew from experience that healing couldn't be rushed. One day, after a breathing session, Tasha lingered. Kim approached quietly. "Did that feel okay?" she asked. Tasha nodded. "It's weird. I haven't sat still like that in a long time. Usually I'm either running after Ava or trying to stay out of trouble." Kim smiled. "You're not alone in that. I used to think sitting still was weakness. Turns out it's the bravest thing some of us ever do." That opened the door. Over the next few weeks, Tasha began sharing pieces of her story, the abusive partner she escaped, the months she and Ava spent in and out of shelters, the job interviews that went nowhere, the cold looks from people when they saw her food stamps. Kim didn't judge, she listened. She offered quiet encouragement and steady presence. One night, as they stacked yoga mats together, Tasha turned to Kim. "Can I ask you something?" "Just doing." "Of course. Why are you doing this? I mean, this whole place. You're not like some rich lady giving away charity. You're here, every day." Kim paused. "Because someone once believed in me when I had nothing. No explanations, no questions, just belief. And that changed everything." Tasha looked down, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of the mat. "Do you think someone like me could ever help someone else one day?" Kim looked her in the eye. "You already are." The weeks passed, and the rhythm of the studio grew into something steady, almost sacred. Tasha began volunteering between sessions, setting up chairs, arranging herbal tea, checking in on new participants. Kim noticed how naturally she encouraged others, how she would speak to someone lingering at the edge of a group and gently draw them in. It was like watching a mirror of her own early days. One afternoon, after a particularly emotional healing circle, Kim and Tasha walked to the corner cafe for a tea. It had become a quiet ritual between them. Kim paid, as always, and they found a bench outside under a tree just beginning to bloom. "I was thinking," Tasha began, staring into her cup, "we should do a weekend retreat. For the moms, someplace quiet. I don't know, somewhere with trees and quiet air and no judgment." Kim raised her eyebrows. "A retreat?" Tasha shrugged. "I mean, Just an idea. I think it's a wonderful idea, Kim said. And I think you're the perfect person to lead it. Tasha froze. Me? Yes. For the first time, Tasha didn't deflect or deny. She just looked at Kim with eyes wide and damp. Okay, she whispered. That night, Kim sat alone in her small apartment, updating the studio's website with information about the upcoming retreat. She wrote the words carefully. Led by community mentor Tasha Green, this weekend program is designed for women healing from trauma and reclaiming their strength. She paused, then clicked publish. Somewhere across the city, Keanu sat in the back of a quiet cinema after wrapping up a late Q&A for a film screening. He scrolled through the Wellness Studios page, saw the retreat listing, and smiled. No one would ever connect him to this, and that was the point. The goodness was multiplying, quietly, powerfully, exactly as it was meant to. A week before the retreat, Kim sat in a community planning meeting with two local nonprofit leaders who had taken interest in the studio's impact. One of them, a counselor from a transitional housing center, had brought along a handful of testimonies from women who had attended Kim's workshops. One testimony stood out. For the first time, I believe I deserve to be here. This space made me feel human again. Kim held that paper for a long time after the meeting ended. Back at the studio, she posted it on the bulletin board next to photos from recent sessions. One by one, the women stopped to read it. Some smiled. Others wiped away tears. Later, as Kim walked through the studio before closing, she noticed Tasha sitting alone on a mat, Ava sleeping beside her. Long day? Kim asked, settling down next to her. Tasha nodded. But a good one. They sat in silence for a while. Kim? Yeah. Do you ever feel like maybe the hard parts had a reason? Kim looked at her. All the time. She reached over and gently brushed a strand of hair from Ava's forehead. Sometimes the broken pieces make room for something stronger. And in that quiet, nothing else needed to be said. That night, after another long meeting with his team, Keanu sat quietly in his den, the room dimly lit by a single floor lamp. His phone rested on the arm of the couch, unlocked, waiting. The screen was open to the same community forum where he had posted before, anonymously as always. The responses to his second post had been overwhelming, but something in him needed more, a deeper layer, a closer connection to the people walking the same emotional tightrope as Kim once had. So? He typed, slowly, carefully. Who helped you believe in yourself when you couldn't? Tell us your incredible story. He paused before posting it, reading the words again. The question was simple, but he knew, from the flood of previous responses, that it would open something powerful. He hit submit and leaned back, the weight of the day falling from his shoulders. His eyes were tired, but his heart wasn't. Within minutes, the first replies began trickling in. My middle school teacher, Mrs. Denson. I was failing, falling apart at home. One afternoon, she held me back after class and told me I was meant for more. I didn't believe her, but I never forgot it. She saw something I couldn't. My daughter. I was in rehab 2 weeks clean, thinking about walking away. Then I got a crayon drawing in the mail that said, I miss you, Mommy. I cried for 2 hours straight. She doesn't even remember it now, but I do. Every day. Keanu kept scrolling. Dozens became hundreds. A soldier wrote about a stranger in an airport who simply sat next to him and said, You look like someone who's carrying too much alone. They talked for an hour. He said it stopped him from ending his life that night. A single mom wrote about a woman who left an envelope under her door with $200, 0 cents in it, and a note that read, You're not invisible. Keanu's eyes stung as he read the stories. These weren't just comments. They were confessions, lifelines. They carried the exact same spirit he had hoped Kim would someday feel. That someone saw her, believed in her, even when she didn't ask for it. Then he came across one that stopped him cold. A stranger helped me once, I never knew who. Rent lowered suddenly. A job found me. Hope came back. I still don't know who did it, but I made a vow that day. I'd spend my life passing it on. Keanu stared at the words, heart pounding softly. He didn't reply, didn't save the post publicly, but he bookmarked it. Then, quietly, he whispered, "That's the point." Keanu returned to the thread the next morning, coffee in hand, eyes still red from the night before. The post had exploded overnight. Hundreds more stories, hundreds more moments where someone, somewhere had stepped in when hope was vanishing. Some of the stories were short, just a few sentences. Others stretched into paragraphs, each one a window into a quiet miracle. I was 17, sleeping in my car. I didn't tell anyone. One day, my manager at the gas station slipped a grocery card into my bag. No words, just kindness. That was the week everything changed. Another story came from a woman recently released from prison. My parole officer didn't treat me like a number. She gave me books, talked to me like I mattered. That woman saved my soul. Keanu's fingers hovered over the screen, aching to respond. But he never did. That wasn't the role he had chosen for himself in these moments. He was the quiet reader in the corner of the room, the one who believed, who felt, but never signed his name. He noticed one username, replying to others, offering encouragement, amplifying people's experiences with small affirmations. A retired nurse. Username, Joy from Small Things. She wrote, "To all of you sharing your incredible stories, thank you. You remind us that the world hasn't lost its heart." That sentiment wrapped around Keanu like a soft blanket. He bookmarked her message too. Then he opened a notebook, the same one where he had sketched out the early outlines of Project Willow. He flipped to the back and began a new page. At the top he wrote in block letters, "Pass it on." Underneath he started listing ideas. Scholarship funds, anonymous aid groups, neighborhood kindness circles. The fire that had been lit by Kim's struggle was now becoming something larger. The ripple he had started was reaching others. Now others were throwing their own stones into the water. Keanu sat back in his chair and closed his eyes. It was never about being seen. It was about seeing others. And that was enough. The first email came quietly, tucked between spam and meeting confirmations. A local journalist named Rachel Kavanaugh had begun inquiring about the financial origins of the new wellness studio that had risen almost overnight in downtown Los Feliz. It wasn't uncommon for new businesses to draw attention, but this one was different. It had become something of a phenomenon, drawing in former inmates, domestic violence survivors, and single mothers, all under the same gentle roof of yoga, counseling, and job readiness workshops. The journalist's email was polite but pointed. She wanted to speak with someone from the studio's founding board. There was just one problem. No board publicly existed. Keanu's team had known this might happen eventually. From the moment Project Willow launched, they prepared for every angle: media, legal, public records. But the journalist's timing was uncomfortably close to the studio's first televised segment, where Kim had spoken passionately about transformation and second chances. That segment had gone viral locally, triggering both praise and curiosity. Rachel dove into property tax filings and traced the studio's leaseholder. It led her to a shell company that had only existed for 8 months. That company, in turn, was managed by a financial consulting firm with offices in Toronto, London, and New York, but no public-facing executives. She reached out again. This time, she wanted to interview the studio director, Keanu Reeves. When the request for an interview landed in Kim's inbox, she hesitated. Public speaking still made her nervous, but the studio's growth had placed her in a visible role. After some thought, she replied with a cheerful "yes" and invited the reporter to visit during one of the free meditation workshops. She had nothing to hide. At least, that's what she believed. Rachel arrived. with a small notepad and a warm smile, casually dressed, observant. She introduced herself to Kim with a handshake and a compliment about the studio's calming atmosphere. For the first few minutes, their conversation stayed light: how the programs were structured, how the community responded, what Kim's personal journey had been like. But then the questions shifted. "So, how did this all come together so quickly?" Rachel asked, pen poised. "It's rare for a place to go from an idea to a fully operating center with city permits, a lease, and full-time staff in under a year." Kim blinked, momentarily thrown. "Honestly, it just kind of happened. I got a call about a leadership opportunity, and it all grew from there. I think they'd been watching my work for a while online." "And who exactly offered you the position?" Kim laughed lightly. "A woman named Margot. I didn't know her before, but she said she'd heard my podcast and thought I was the right fit. I guess I finally got lucky." Rachel nodded, writing something down. Then her tone softened. "Do you have any connection to anyone well-known? A public figure, maybe someone who might have helped from the background?" Kim burst out laughing. "Me? No, nothing like that. I'm not connected to anyone famous. I just work hard." Behind her smile, Rachel observed something deeper, a sincerity that didn't feel rehearsed. If Kim was part of a cover-up, she was either the world's best actor or genuinely unaware. Either way, it made the story more intriguing. Back at her office, Rachel started digging again, searching for property transfers, digital footprints, shell corporations. That night she published a teaser online. "The Rise of Willow House. Is there a famous name behind the curtain?" Within hours, Keanu's team saw it. The article was just vague enough to avoid triggering alarms, but just specific enough to make Keanu's intervention team act fast. The headline had already started gaining traction on social media, especially among niche wellness influencers who speculated wildly about celebrity backers. Keanu sat in his home office, the lights dim, rereading the teaser. His jaw tightened, not out of fear but out of concern for Kim. The last thing she needed was a spotlight. She was building something real, something beautiful. He wouldn't let anyone turn it into gossip. His longtime legal advisor, Marcy, was already on a call with the firm that managed the shell company holding the property lease. "We need to sever any metadata that ties us back," she said crisply. "Document origin paths, IP logs, tax form routing, clean it all. If she digs deeper, she'll hit dead ends." "Will she?" Keanu asked. "She might," Marcy admitted. "She's smart, but we've buried bigger trails than this before." Dev, the financial strategist behind Project Willow, chimed in. "We can create noise, redirect her. We'll feed her a new name, a philanthropic fund based in Oregon, anonymous donors, female-led initiatives. She'll spend weeks chasing it. Make it look organic," Keanu said. "No fingerprints." The team moved swiftly. Within 48 hours, Rachel received a quiet email from someone claiming to be a former employee of the Oregon Foundation. The timing felt too convenient, but it was plausible. It led her down a different rabbit hole. For now, the story was stalled. Meanwhile, Kim continued her work. She noticed the sudden wave of interest from strangers on social media, people asking about the studio, about her backers, about how she'd made it. She shrugged most of it off. "I guess people want to believe success needs a secret hero," she said to Tasha one morning after someone commented on her podcast, asking who was really behind her. "But sometimes, it's just a whole lot of hard work and timing." She didn't know she was half right. That evening, Keanu opened her latest podcast episode, listening as she talked about growth, vulnerability, and impact. Her voice filled his headphones, stronger, more confident than ever. The secret still held, but just barely. The late afternoon sun spilled gold across the freshly painted walls of the wellness studio. Inside, rows of folding chairs faced a newly unveiled mural stretching across the east wall, a sweeping depiction of women and men in various stages of healing. a single mother planting seeds in a garden, a young veteran teaching yoga to teens, a survivor hugging her daughter beneath blooming trees. The images weren't grand, they were quiet, warm, and full of unspoken resilience. At the bottom of the mural, just below the painted feet of a woman standing tall with her arms open to the sky, was a small bronze plaque. Simple, quiet. It read, "For those who plant hope when nothing else grows." There were no names, no signatures, no dedications, and that was the point. The event had been planned for weeks, an open community celebration to honor the studio's expanding impact. Word had spread quickly. People came not just from the neighborhood but from surrounding towns. Former clients, scholarship recipients, and volunteers filled the studio until it buzzed with life and laughter. Kids played near the juice table. Neighbors shared hugs. A sense of something sacred hovered in the room. Near the back, leaning against the wall in a dark hoodie and sunglasses, stood Keanu. No one knew who he was, not really. A few people glanced his way, thinking he looked familiar, but he kept his head low, his presence soft. He hadn't come to be recognized. He'd come to witness. Kim stood near the front, holding a note card but glancing at it less and less as she spoke. Her hair was tied up in a loose bun. She wore a linen dress with sleeves rolled to the elbows, revealing faded ink tattoos and calloused hands. Her voice, though trembling at first, grew steadier as she talked. "When I walked into this building the first time, I was terrified," she said, her hand gesturing toward the mural. "I didn't know how I was going to pay rent. I hadn't had a steady client in weeks, and yet something shifted." She paused, looking down, then back at the crowd. "People talk about miracles like lightning strikes, big, flashy things. But I think sometimes miracles are quiet. They come as opportunities you didn't expect. People who believe in you without needing applause. Rooms like this. Faces like yours." A quiet murmur ran through the room. Some nodded, others wiped their eyes. Keanu didn't move. His throat tightened. He pressed one hand gently against his chest. Kim looked toward the plaque, her expression softening. "I don't know who turned the tide for me," she said, voice catching, "but I know someone did. And to that person, wherever they are, whoever they are, thank you." The applause was gentle at first, then grew into a wave, more emotional than loud. It wasn't the kind of clapping reserved for celebrities or grand openings. It was the kind that rose from a room full of people who had seen change, who had felt it in their own lives, and now bore witness to someone else standing in that light. Keanu remained near the back, still as a stone. Kim stepped down from the small platform and was immediately surrounded by well-wishers. Former clients approached her with hugs. A teenage girl handed her a card covered in glitter glue. A middle-aged man, recently clean and sober, thanked her for leading the breathing circle that helped him get through withdrawal. And through it all, the plaque remained. Bronze and unmoving, small yet anchoring the room in something deeper than the occasion. A reminder that transformation often begins unseen. Keanu quietly slipped outside. The early evening air had cooled. He walked around the corner of the building and leaned against the brick wall, hands in his pockets, eyes closed. In the distance, he could hear laughter and music from the studio's speakers. It was the sound of something right. Something whole. Behind him, the mural faced the world through a wide studio window. The painted figures glowed softly under the warm lights inside. He pulled out his phone, checked a message from Marla, his coordinator on the project. Plaque secured, no paper trail. All questions rerouted through the Foundation's anonymous fund. No link to you, we're clear. Keanu didn't respond right away. Instead, he tapped on a folder in his gallery labeled Willow. Inside were a few photographs. One of the mural taken before the event, another of Kim walking into her office weeks earlier with a smile so wide it had startled him, And finally, a picture of the plaque, taken up close, before it had been bolted into place. For those who plant hope when nothing else grows. He stared at that phrase. He had written it himself. He remembered the tree they used to climb as kids, behind their old apartment. A gnarled old willow in a patch of dirt where nothing else survived. It had been their fortress, their escape. Kim used to tell stories under it. She'd braid his hair and whisper that they were going to make it, no matter what life threw their way. She had planted hope back then, when he had none. Now, without her knowing, he'd returned the favor. Keanu stood there a little longer, the hum of life from the studio wrapping around him like a quiet song. In some ways, it felt like the ending of a long journey, and in others, just the beginning of something he would never need to explain or claim. A few people trickled out of the building, laughing together under the twilight sky. Kim's voice floated among them, vibrant and alive, as she chatted with the studio director about plans for expanding their outreach program to local schools. Keanu watched from the shadows, unseen. A little girl ran past him, her ponytail flying, clutching a paper with a crayon drawing of the mural. She didn't see him. She was too busy living, dreaming, carrying pieces of this new hope forward without even realizing it. It was enough. Before turning away, Keanu looked one last time at the plaque gleaming softly beneath the mural. The words were simple, humble, almost invisible compared to the colors bursting across the wall, just the way he wanted it. He adjusted the brim of his cap low over his face, shoved his hands deeper into his jacket pockets, and disappeared into the gathering dusk. The gift had been planted. It would keep growing without him. The late afternoon sun blanketed the small neighborhood park in gold, warming the field where a community fair was underway. Laughter echoed from every corner, children racing through an inflatable obstacle course, teens huddled over tie-dye booths, elderly couples sharing ice cream under swaying tents. The local wellness studio had sponsored the fair, their logo printed in soft colors across the fluttering banners. Keanu stood near the edge of the scene, hidden beneath a plain hoodie and dark sunglasses. No one noticed him. That was the point. He didn't come to be seen. Across the grass, he spotted her instantly. Kim stood by the storytelling tent, holding a tray of handmade smoothies for a group of kids who'd just finished a yoga demo. Her eyes sparkled as she laughed, head thrown back, the weight of the past year lifted in the sunlight. She wore simple clothes, but she carried herself with unmistakable pride. Not the pride that refuses help, but the kind that comes from rising again. She looked free. Keanu's throat tightened. This was the same girl who, decades ago, had walked into a school office and demanded that her baby brother be moved out of a class where he was being bullied. The girl who'd cut out coupons to stretch their groceries. The girl who stayed behind when he went off chasing his dreams. Who covered her pain with a smile and never once asked for anything back. Now here she was, surrounded by life, by light, by community. He stood in the shade of a sycamore tree for a long time, watching quietly. No one recognized him. A few people passed by with polite nods, assuming he was just another local parent waiting for his child to finish at the arts booth. But he wasn't here for anything except this moment. He took a deep breath, then slowly turned and walked away, heading toward her apartment a few blocks over. In his jacket pocket was a single folded letter. Kim's apartment complex was quiet by the time Keanu arrived. The fair would go on for hours, but he wanted to be sure no one would see him. He stepped around the back entrance, where the staircase was shaded and less used, just as he had done on the few nights he'd left anonymous flowers on her doorstep. He paused in front of her door. The welcome mat was worn but clean. A small ceramic planter to the side held herbs, mint, basil, rosemary. He smiled faintly. She was still nurturing life, even in small pots. From inside, he could hear faint music drifting through the wall. Old soul tunes, probably one of her relaxation playlists. A low hum of voices came through, too. Maybe she had a friend over. Maybe she was just talking on the phone. He crouched slightly and slid the envelope gently beneath her door, careful not to let it bend. It wasn't grand. No signature, no return address. Just a short, handwritten note in the center of plain ivory stationery. You were never alone. Love, always. That was all it said. Not because he didn't have more to tell her, but because that one sentence held everything she needed to know. The rest. How he'd orchestrated the studio, the job, the lowered rent, the scholarships, the murals. None of it needed to be explained. Not now, not ever. Keanu stood there for a moment longer. He rested his hand lightly against the doorframe, whispering the words again to himself. You were never alone. He thought of all the times she had stood behind him, beside him, in front of him, when life got hard, when he felt invisible, when he wanted to give up. She had been his shield in the world before he knew how to fight for himself. And now, finally, she had a shield of her own. He turned away, his footsteps soft against the walkway. The sun had begun to dip low in the sky, casting amber light across the courtyard. It felt like the kind of evening meant for closing a chapter. Quietly, without applause. And Keanu Reeves had never needed an audience. Keanu walked back toward the street, staying in the shadows. A few neighbors passed by with strollers or shopping bags, but none recognized him. His hoodie was pulled low, his beard slightly grown out. Just another man on a quiet evening. Across the street, he stopped under a jacaranda tree and looked up at Kim's apartment window. The lights inside were soft and warm, casting a glow that shimmered faintly behind the sheer curtains. He saw movement, a silhouette passing by, maybe her. He wondered if she had seen the letter yet. Maybe not. Maybe later tonight, after dinner and dishes and laughter had settled. He imagined her finding it, unfolding the paper, reading the words once, then again. He imagined her sitting with it in her hands, silent, unsure whether to cry or smile. He hoped it brought her peace. Not questions, not confusion, just peace. He stayed there a moment longer, not to be seen, not to be known, but simply to feel close, to say goodbye in the way he knew how. The breeze picked up, brushing the hem of his coat. Somewhere, wind chimes clinked from a balcony above. He took one last look at the window and then turned. Down the block, the city buzzed with its usual rhythm, cars moving, dogs barking, someone laughing too loud into a phone. But for Keanu, the world had gone still. A chapter had quietly closed, and that was enough. He didn't need her to find him. He didn't need to explain. Because some love stories, the ones that matter most, are written in the silences, in the sacrifices no one sees, in the moments when walking away is the most loving thing you can do. He disappeared into the sidewalk crowd, just as unnoticed as he had arrived. Behind him, on a modest welcome mat, a letter waited, and behind the door, a woman who had once carried the weight of both their lives was about to understand, even without knowing, that she had never walked alone. Not once, not ever. Sometimes the greatest help isn't loud. It doesn't come with grand speeches or flashing lights. It doesn't seek attention or ask for thanks. Sometimes the help that changes everything moves in silence. It passes through our lives like a quiet wind, leaving behind only hope, strength, and a new beginning. Kim would never know the full story of how her life turned around. She would never know about the nights Keanu stayed up reading strangers' stories, searching for wisdom. She would never know about the lawyers, the shell companies, the anonymous donors, or the letters he never signed. She would only know that somehow, when everything felt lost, a door opened. A second chance appeared. A flicker of light guided her forward. And in truth, that's all she ever needed. The plaque at the wellness studio said it best. For those who plant hope when nothing else grows. It didn't need names. It didn't need credit. It simply needed to exist. a testament to the invisible hands that sometimes lift us when we don't even realize we're falling. Maybe that's the truest kind of love, the kind that demands nothing back, the kind that never says, "Look at me," the kind that stands at a distance, smiling as you find your own strength, your own wings. If you are listening to this story now, maybe you've known someone like that too. Someone who showed up when you had no reason to expect help. Someone who quietly believed in you when you couldn't even believe in yourself. Someone who didn't fix your life for you, but gave you the one thing you couldn't give yourself, a reason to keep going. Maybe they were a teacher, maybe a neighbor, maybe a friend who barely knew you but chose to see your heart anyway. Maybe they walked away after, expecting no recognition. Maybe you never even got the chance to say thank you. But their gift lives on inside you. It grows every day you keep moving forward. Every day you pass on that same unseen kindness to someone else. That's how light spreads. Not through fame, not through noise, but through quiet, stubborn acts of belief, carried from one life to another. So today, we ask you, in the last line of this Sikwan symbol, has someone's quiet belief in you changed your life? Share your incredible story below. Maybe it was a stranger who paid your bus fare when you had nothing left. Maybe it was a teacher who said, "You matter," when no one else did. Maybe it was a brother, a sister, a parent, or a friend who stood silently behind you while you fought your hardest battle. Your story matters. Your story could be the hope someone else needs to hear today. We invite you to share your incredible story in the comments. Tell us how an unseen act of kindness changed your path. Tell us what it meant to be believed in, even when you couldn't believe in yourself. Because kindness doesn't end with one person. It grows, it echoes, it carries forward, sometimes across generations, across lives that will never fully know the names behind the gift. And if you're still waiting for your second chance, for your unseen hand to reach out and steady you, take heart. Sometimes it comes when you least expect it. Sometimes it starts with a small crack of light through a closed door. Sometimes it begins with someone, somewhere, believing in you, without asking for anything back. That's the power of silent hope. That's the legacy of unseen love. And that's why we'll keep telling stories like this. Because they remind us of something the world forgets too easily. Not all heroes wear capes. Not all heroes need to be seen. Sometimes, the greatest hero in your story is the one who stands far enough away for you to see yourself. Thank you for spending this time with us. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories, and share this message of hope with someone you love. Next video preview. An inspiring, moving, and dramatic story about a disabled veteran helping a young single mother who works as a waitress at a bar. Both are in dire straits, and Keanu Reeves shows up, changing everything in ways no one could have predicted. Until then, keep believing in quiet miracles. They're closer than you think.